I focused on internal and external comms. Internally, I made sure that everybody within the organization knew what was happening. So, for example, as a part of the onboarding process, I added marketing. And all new hires would sit with marketing for an hour and understand what marketing does, where we are in the news, what our core messaging is, what our core values are. External, we went through the rebrand, hired a PR agency. So the company was an affordable housing company. They weren't telling the stories of these amazing housing properties that were being built, right? It was certainly a massive effort for sure, but it started with like little tiny changes that you can make, like going to HR and saying, I think marketing should be included in employee onboarding. Because I believe that you're like a part of your brand experience is from the minute you walk into the door for your first interview to the minute you leave on your last day. Like that's all part of your brand experience.
Could you just tell us at a high level what you do for a profession in terms of like marketing and PR? Like what does that entail? That's a ubiquitous term these days, it seems, with social media.
Yeah. So I own and operate a PR agency with my husband. Um, I started my career in the corporate world for the first like decade and a half or so. And PR had kind of always been my part of my remit. So I kind of worked my way up from like the bottom of the marketing chain, marketing coordinator, that kind of thing, and just kind of worked my way up until my last corporate role. I was the head of marketing. And I had always kind of wanted to explore consulting, but was too afraid. And when I met my husband, he's a lifelong entrepreneur and he was like, "You're so good at this. You should be doing this for yourself. Why aren't you doing this for you? Why are you doing this for other people?" And frankly, I said, "No, thank you." I would wanted to keep my cushy job and my very cushy bonus. Um, and then, so that was sort of in 2020. And then the back to office email came. And I don't know if you've had sort of like a business or work environment like this, but I was in an environment where two things. One, the office that I had didn't have windows. So I couldn't see the sun for like a good portion of the day. And that like I just like I need to see sky. Um, and then the second was that there was this sort of definitely misconception, but like company wide, there was this sort of posture that if you weren't at your desk, you must not be working. And like in comms and marketing, that's just not true. There are so many things involved in creativity that require you to not be at your desk. And that doesn't account for like, I was in California at the time, so West Coast, that didn't account for like getting up at 5 a.m. to make sure that an 8 a.m. Eastern press release went out just fine. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
like there were intangibles that people couldn't see that were still part of my remit and my job. And yet there was this sort of stance that like if you're not at your desk, you're not working. And I just kind of looked at he was then my fiance at the time, and I said, I can't go back. Like I can't go back to that environment. And he was like, good. I've been waiting for you to jump and do your own thing. And so I started out by saying, like, I'm, going to be a marketing consultant. And my employer actually came back and said, whatever you're doing, we want to work with you. We're a client. We want to keep working
Nice.
with you. But what I found was saying that you're a marketing consultant is really broad. Like people don't know what you mean. They can't see themselves in that. So they're like, what do you mean? Like, are you gonna like redo my website? Are you gonna run my social media? What does
Mhm.
that mean? And so I found it very difficult to find clients because it was like anybody in the world could do that. Why me? But I had always had PR as part of my remit. In my last corporate role, I hired a PR agency, built a team. I mean, just like built the marketing function from the ground up
Mhm.
and put them through a rebrand that led them to be sold for over $700 million. And that like would not have happened without this rebrand. Anyway, so I was working on a project and it was like I was the PR, we were the PR agency for this project. And there was like a different agency that was a creative agency. And then there was a different agency that was handling different things, right? So they kind of had all these different agencies working on this project. And one of the guys from the creative agency was like, "You're so good at PR, you should lead with that. Like, why aren't you leading with that?" And I sometimes can be like very hesitant to suggestions at first. And so I was like, "Nah, I don't wanna, because then like that's gonna be too narrow." Um, but I gave it a try, and it turns out, like, that was clarity, and all of a sudden people can go, "Oh, okay, I need PR, right? I wanna be in articles, I wanna be on the news,
Hmm.
I wanna be thought of as a thought leader, I wanna have a LinkedIn presence, I want" all of those things. And so we started leading with PR, and our business just grew and grew, and then we did sort of a second niche down because I was like, "Ah, niching down really works." And so I sort of, I was featured in an article. Let me back up even more than that. In my sort of corporate life,
Hmm.
I worked for an organization called International SOS, and they're like a global kind of health, travel, safety, security company.
Okay.
And they operate in a space that's called duty of care. So if you're working for another company, let's say you're an employee of Google, and Google sends you on a business trip to China, Google has the duty of care, the obligation to make sure that you're safe and healthy while you're traveling for them. That's called duty of care. And then the employee has what's called duty of loyalty, which is that if the company is going to take care of me, I have the duty to be loyal to this company. And they had, because they were, I mean, like working with the majority of the Fortune 500, such a big company, 99 clinics all over the world. You could call their assistance center and be on the phone with the doctor in 45 seconds. And I used it, and I know that it works because I had a tooth problem. And so I called the assistance center, and I don't know if you've ever had like a tooth issue before, but it can go from 0 to 60 really quickly.
Hmm.
And so I called the assistance center, and they got me into an emergency dentist to get my tooth pulled. And I was speaking to someone in 45 seconds. Anyway, they had a relationship with the UN, and the UN was looking for somebody to help them communicate the 17 sustainable development goals to the Fortune 500.
Okay.
And I kind of raised my hand for that project and was like, "Yes, I'd love to do that." And so I wound up helping a huge chunk of the Fortune 500 write their first sustainability reports, map their what they're doing to the sustainable development goals, and a lot of them were already doing things. They didn't know that what they were doing qualified,
Hmm.
to be mapped or anything like that. And then sort of write these sustainability reports for them and help them understand how to do that. And I took that with me. And so I maintained my relationships with the UN at my next role and as I've gone out on my own. And so I
Hmm.
was featured in an article. The head of I think the UN, I think I I don't know exactly what his title is, but, he's one of he speaks on behalf of the UN. He sort of made this declaration in 2023 that just as advertisers and marketers were responsible for people dying when they're advertising cigarettes, advertisers and marketers are responsible for the misinformation that's coming out about climate and climate change, and that they had the responsibility to not work for a fossil fuel company or to really make sure that they were using their gifts for good. And so obviously I had something to say about that. And so I reached out to the reporter and was quoted in an article with the founder of an organization called Clean Creatives. And so I spoke with him, and I took what's now called the Clean Creatives Pledge, which is to say that I will use my gifts only for good. So I will not
It's
work for
like
a
the
fossil fuel
Hippocratic
company or a
oath
cigarette
for
company or
PR.
any. Yeah, exactly. So now we are a PR agency that is mission based, and we are focused on companies and projects that help people and the planet. And that can be kind of broad. I mean, we worked on quite a few things. Like when we talk about helping people, we worked on a space project where like it was a software that was used by the United States Space Force and
Nice.
NASA and Voyager and like the Artemis mission that's
Hmm.
going up, I think this week or next week, if it's not delayed again. They're using the software that we represented for over a year.
Amazing.
Yeah, so like it can be pretty broad to be mission based. We had a beauty company that supported blindness, so they put braille on all their products. I had a cohort of women who all came together and volunteered. They're so cute. They're in their like 50s and 60s, and they travel the country into like deep red areas, and they talk to them about climate change. So it kind of spans what being mission based is, but that's sort of the underbelly of what we do.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It sounds like it's an exciting path that you're on. It where even if you go to a dentist, it can open up an exciting opportunity for you.
Yeah.
You touched on earlier about how your experience led to this massive growth and rebrand of an organization. Are you able to, at least at a high level, share your playbook for turning PR and comms into pipeline and revenue?
Yeah. So, I mean, we did just an overhaul of everything first. And that started with their logo. Like it had taken them 20 years to get to $7 billion in revenue, $16 billion in assets under management. In the 2.5 years that I was there, I took them from that 7 billion to 9 billion and from 16 billion to 20 billion in assets under management. So I had a sort of huge impact on the organization. And there's a few things. One, I focused on internal and external comms. Internally, I made sure that everybody within the organization knew what was happening. So, for example, as a part of the onboarding process, I added marketing. And all new hires would sit with marketing for an hour and understand what marketing does, where we are in the news, what our core messaging is, what our core values are, um, what our brand is, why it is that way. Their original like logo file was still in a Microsoft Word document. It was wild. So we hired an agency and they did a bunch of logo options for us, and I chose the logo, and I did all kinds of internal surveys and helped, bring the company together to choose new mission, vision, values. And then I asked each department to choose their own department-wide mission, vision, and values. So I really got everybody involved internally, where prior to my entry into the organization, it was very siloed. Leadership was sort of doing their own thing and nobody else knew what was going on within the organization. That included like, one of the most basic things that you can do is that when you're sending out a press release the day before, you send it internally and say, this is going out tomorrow. Here's the latest news. They had TVs all over the office, and I would put up our social media stats and, you know, birthdays and, all kinds of stuff just to like make people feel connected. Um, and so that was internal. External, we went through the rebrand, hired a PR agency. So the company was an affordable housing company, but they weren't telling the stories of these amazing housing properties that were being built, right? Some of them were on incredible programs like the Water Sense program, where and then the entire building ran on reusable water. And so they were
Hmm,
never pulling from the grid,
wow,
or like reusable energy, never pulling from the grid.
amazing.
And so I got to sort of tell those stories. And then I helped them write their first sustainability report and sort of showcase, and I mapped them to the SDGs, to the GRI. I built them an entire new presentation deck. I built them new templates for all of their investor relations, all of their originations, all of their accounting. Everything was unified. And the people within the organization had a say in how that was going to unfold. It was certainly a massive effort for sure. But it started with like little tiny changes that you can make, like going
Hmm,
to HR and saying, I think marketing should be included in employee onboarding. Because I believe that you're like a part of your brand experience is from the minute you walk into the door for your first interview to the minute you leave on your last day. Like that's all part of your brand experience. And so why shouldn't new hires, even if they're going into accounting or finance or, in that case, it was, construction or whatever it was, they knew what was going on with marketing from day one.
hmm. It sounds like interdepartmental communication and like culture communication or cultural creation so that there's an alignment, mission alignment. You touched on perhaps a few of the ingredients here, but what is one rebrand mistake that you see mid market companies repeat?
Ooh, that is such a good question. One, I think there's a misconception that people think that their rebrand is news, and it's not. It's only news to them.
Interesting.
And two, I often see that they don't communicate it well enough, both internally and externally. So they don't really tell people inside the company, hey, we're going to do a rebrand. This is what that means. Our logo is going to look different. Our font is going to be different. So everything that you work on from this day is going to look different. Our
Hmm.
presentations are going to look different. All of our templates are going to look different. And then externally, they fail to communicate that to their clients.
Hmm.
And so actually what we did was we it was 2020 and it was January, so the pandemic hadn't it was happening, but it wasn't like happening yet. And so I kind of got this idea that like this would be our 2020 vision, right? This rebrand is going to be like the vision for 2020.
Hmm.
And so we got custom Ray-Bans and we sent them to two groups of clients, one existing clients, and they said, "We've got a new look." So it was like you got a custom pair of Ray-Bans, and there was a note inside that was branded that said, "Hey, Alliant Capital has a new look." And then we sent a pair to a group of previous clients who had worked with us before but were not clients anymore. And those, they got personal Ray-Bans, and those had a note that said, "Take another look."
Hmm.
As in, we've gone through this rebrand. We're a different company now. Give us another shot.
Hmm.
And with the current clients, we obviously had a 100% success rate. All of our clients stayed with us, and they loved the rebrand, and they thought it just like grew us up, 100 million times. But we actually had, I think, like an 85% success rate with previous clients, and they decided to give Alliant another chance
Yeah.
because of that.
Amazing. Um, I want to make sure I understood something you said earlier when you mentioned the internal and the external communication being vital for the rebrand. But then you said earlier that there's a mistake that mid-market companies make thinking that their rebrand is news when it's not.
Yeah.
As far as the external communication, when you say it's not news, do you mean like they don't need to put out a press release, but it's just more like communicating with like direct stakeholders?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of companies will, XYZ company goes through rebrand and like unless you're Jaguar or this like huge
Hmm.
legacy brand, right? Like it's not news. When Jaguar rebranded, it was news because everybody thought the rebrand was horrible.
I was going to ask, I mean, since you just brought it up, I wanted to ask you, like, what are your thoughts as a professional in this space? Do you think that they did their job well, or were there a couple of things that you might have done differently with that?
In particular with a legacy brand like Jaguar, you don't touch it. Because that takes the legacy away from it. That's my opinion. And so it took like the new cars looked cool and the color palette was cool, and I get it. He made the presentation the next day and he was like, "We were thrilled to have your attention." So it was like an attention grab, not something that really elevated the brand in terms of status. That would be like trying to rebrand Louis Vuitton, right?
Mm,
And like
mhm,
you lose all of that history,
mm,
which we saw again with Cracker Barrel, right? Like they try to rebrand and you lose the history of what makes Cracker Barrel.
mm,
So with a legacy brand, I wouldn't touch it. If it's a newer brand and you're a startup and you've reached a stage where you've had a lot of momentum, you've raised, maybe you just hit your Series A,
mm,
and you're like, okay, it's time for something different. Then you can do a rebrand, right? But that's not going to be on the front page of TechCrunch just because you're a startup, right? Like
mm,
reporters, unless they're marketing reporters that cover rebrands, are not going to care about your rebrand.
mhm. When is a company PR ready?
Oh, my God, that's such a great question. Um, One, when you have internal subject matter experts that have um, insights that should and are willing to be shared with the public.
Mhm,
And the public could be potential clients, it could be just the general public, right? So one of the things that I see from companies that aren't PR ready is their only subject matter expert is like the CEO and he's never available and like he can't sit with a reporter for like 6 days. You're going to consistently lose that opportunity because PR is built on speed. Reporters have really fast turnaround, really quick deadlines.
Mhm.
That's sort of the first indication, is that you've got multiple subject matter experts within the organization that have a stance, that have knowledge, institutional knowledge, and they're ready and able and willing to share it like in, in a quick format.
Mhm.
Um, the second is you want more broad attention, and you're not looking for PR to necessarily be a driver of revenue, and you understand the difference. So you're ready for more brand awareness,
Mhm.
both, let's say, within your industry and to more broad. Um, but you are not dependent on that for revenue. So you've got either outside funding or really healthy pipeline and really healthy sales and things like that.
Mhm.
Three, when you have the budget for both the PR firm, which can run you on like a very low end, $5,000 a month, to a like very high end, 30, 40, $50,000 a month. When you are ready for that budget, in addition to the budget to actually let them do things. So PR firm might want to do specific ads. You need to have the budget to do that.
Mhm.
We ran specific contests. You need to have the budget to do that. We wanted to do different stunts. You need to have the budget to do that. It's not enough just to have the budget to pay a PR firm. Because if you
Mhm.
pay a PR firm and then handicap them by tying their hands behind their back and not
Mhm.
let them do what they're designed to do, which is get you attention, they're going to be set up to fail.
I imagine there's quite a broad range there from Ray-Bans to building side murals. But do you have
Yeah.
like an approximate kind of estimate, like a percentage that they should set aside if they're paying 5 to 50,000 a month for a PR firm? How much might they want to set aside for what the fuel the PR firm needs to execute?
5% of revenue at
Okay,
the minimum. Yeah. At the bare minimum, 5% of revenue in addition to the retainer.
got it. And if you had to pick three KPIs for PR that correlate with revenue, what would they be?
That's very challenging. They don't
Context
often.
depend. Okay.
Yeah, it's very challenging. Because this is a really weird analogy, but like that's like saying in California we had a lot of wildfires, right? And
Mhm.
you'd have a bunch of different wildfires pop up. That's like saying which ember caused that tree to go up in
Wow.
flames,
Okay.
right? That's very difficult to track, right? You just
Interesting.
know that there's a bunch of stuff on fire and you don't know exactly which
So
ember
you're basically
started it.
entering each new engagement like a scientist? Like you're like collecting data and trying to figure out the unique kind of admixture for that particular company and market and timing and all of this before you come up with your kind of thesis?
Mhm. Yeah. So we have a process that we call our jam board.
Okay, yeah.
And it is essentially we get with the leaders in the company, and they dictate who that is. Sometimes it's just the CEO, sometimes it's, the CEO and six other people. And we ask them very pointed questions. Things like, what are you here to do? Like, not why are you here today, but like what are you here to do? And the reason that we're asking those questions is that we want to hear it from them. We want to hear how they speak about their own company, how they speak internally. We'll ask them things like, where is their energy and momentum in the organization or in the business overall? Where is their fear and frustration? Um, so we ask them kind of a bunch of different questions, and then we look for um, themes, recurring themes that come across over and over and over again. And so once we find those things that come across over and over and over again, sometimes it's customer experience. In every section, everybody's talking about customer experience. Okay, that's a core theme that emerged, right? And so that's going to be one of the core messages is your customer experience, right? So we look for these things that stand out, and a lot of times what we found is they don't know that those things are talked about as much as they are because they're not talking to each other. So when they can see everybody's responses written out, we do like a whole thing with Post-its and everybody just kind of writes and then we look at it, right?
Mm,
And they'll go, wow, every single person mentioned this.
mhm,
And they'll go, I didn't I didn't think we ever talked about that. I thought I was the only one, right?
mhm.
Well, clearly it's a core message that you guys want to talk about because every single one of you mentioned it. So that's kind of the process that we go through, and then we spit back out at them. There are sort of 3 to 5 key messages that they wanna hit like a drumbeat over and over for at least a quarter.
Mhm.
So they'll have announcements and different things like that, but outside of those announcements, these are the 3 to 5 things that we wanna hit over and over and over. These are the just like a drum, and we want people to be so sick of hearing us talk about it. That's when you're really able to, like, create association
Mhm.
between a brand and a topic.
That's really interesting. It's so you're really kind of influential both with the internal culture and alignment as well as the broader culture and alignment as you're kind of like the whisper as to like what trends might be receptive to certain messaging or kind of how to position, but also like you mentioned, going in with a learner's mindset, perhaps, and kind of teasing out some messaging and things that might be taken for granted internally. Um,
Yeah.
your job sounds a lot more um, like influential. Apologies for the naivety here, but a lot more influential than I anticipated. I didn't necessarily think it was like PR in a box that you could just like repeat with new packaging with each institution. But I didn't realize the depth to which you went both internal and external and kind of how vital PR is.
Yeah, it is. It's crucial for brand awareness, and then also for things like crisis management. So when I was working for the affordable housing company, we had a building that was one of our buildings, and there's a shooting at that building, and a young man died. And so that's an immediate crisis, and PR steps in. So we got internal message right away to everybody to say something has happened at one of our properties. You might get a call from the media. If you get a call from the media, please direct them to this person. We are going to hold a press conference about this topic and what happened and give all the finer details with the police.
Hmm.
And it's going to be at one time. So we're going to invite any client who's interested, anybody else who needs to know, and any press who wants to know any of the information about what happened. They're all going to come to this one thing and we're going to say it once. um, that kind of thing, crisis management and giving watch outs is certainly also a part of it. So we once had a client who one of their clients was the company Ashley Madison. And do you know what Ashley Madison is?
I've heard the name,
Okay.
but I don't know exactly what they do.
It's a website that helps you cheat on your spouse.
Oh, okay. Um,
And
huh.
they were a client and they wanted to do a case study. And I had to raise my hand and go, "You I can't let you do that. Like, I can no. No, I can't let you do that." Um, so it's certainly multifaceted. It's building brand awareness, it's making sure that your leaders are seen as experts in the field. It's crisis management, it's also, like, influencer and blogger management. Um, it's also getting you on podcasts. It's also, um if you have something to publish, let's see if we can get an outlet to publish it instead of self-publish, right?
Mhm.
Um, there's also sort of this misconception that, it's super easy to get what I've written into, like, the New York Times opinion section. Like,
Okay.
a lot of founders think, like, you know, "I'm gonna hire you, and by week 3, I'm gonna be in the Wall Street Journal opinion section." That's very challenging.
Mm.
And so I have to set expectation a lot. And a lot of times we get the best results in terms of like actually connecting it back to revenue. We get the best results from industry publications. So like really niche, very hyper focused industry publications are where the buyers are. That's what they're reading. And so we tend to like when you if I were to tie one thing to revenue, it would be getting either an article or comments, really thoughtful comments in an industry publication or an industry blog or an industry survey or something like that. That is really, really hyper focused. That tends to move the needle in terms of revenue a lot more than, let's say, getting published in Forbes.
I'd like to touch briefly on crisis management. What is, like at a high level, what are you trying to do there? You mentioned kind of you're inviting everyone who needs to hear the message or wants to hear the message, talk about it once, so you're not droning on and on about it. But like, what what are you trying to do? Like from it's almost like, managing a crisis. Can you just walk us through, like, you you step out of your helicopter and you're in the crisis zone. What's going through your mind?
Yeah, so one, I'm always trying to protect the organization's reputation. I wanna make sure that nobody says anything that they're not supposed to say.
Mhm.
Um, I wanna make sure that the organization looks good. So for example, like a recent relevant example would be American Eagle and their sort of crisis with Sydney Sweeney's ad
Right.
campaign, right?
Yeah.
That requires crisis management, and they didn't do any of that. And they didn't even comment on it until like several weeks later.
Mm.
So you want to make sure that you are, if something happens, you want to make sure that you're commenting on it and you want to make sure that you're saying something. So, for example, a good example would be the Astronomer CEO getting caught on camera at a Coldplay concert with
Oh,
someone who
right.
is not his wife.
Yeah.
That's a crisis. That becomes a
Yeah.
crisis for the company, right?
That's almost straight out of a movie.
Yeah. Um, so what did they do? First of all, it became a huge meme and everybody was talking about it, even people without like outside of their um industry. So they
It's
became a
like,
household
don't
name
cheat, but if
overnight.
you're gonna cheat, don't duck.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um and then so the second thing that they did was they hired a PR agency and they hired Gwyneth Paltrow, who
Oh,
is the lead singer of
yeah, yeah.
Coldplay's ex-wife,
Uh-huh.
to say a very specific message. That whole thing, that whole plan that got put together, and I think it got put together within like 24 to 48 hours, was their crisis management. So they had a message to say. They said something about the incident. They made public that there were 2 terminations. And then, they did it in a way that was acceptable to the public, where the public could accept that information and move on. And that's ultimately what you want the public or your audience or your
Mhm.
clientele or, whatever that's what you want them to do from a crisis. You want them to move on.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so that's that's where sort of crisis management comes in.
How do you think they manage that?
I thought they managed it well. I think they did the appropriate thing, which is, 1, they let those people go. Um, 2, they said something about it, and what they said was acceptable, and it allowed people to move on.
Mhm.
And it preserved their reputation
Mhm.
as a company.
Mhm.
So those are the 3 things that I am looking for in like a positive handling of a
Yeah.
crisis.
So we touched on like mid-market and corporate, but for the founders out there, could you maybe share what a 6-week credibility sprint might look like?
Ooh, wow, these are really good questions. Um, okay, so we would come together with a list of target publications, both industry and upper tiers, and go, okay, here's where we hope to be featured. And I say hope because you can't ever guarantee a feature in PR. The decision never lies with us, the PR agency. The decision barely ever even lies with the journalist. The decision to publish always lies with the editor of that publication,
Mhm.
always. So I can write the greatest article in the world on your behalf. If the editor says no, the editor says no, right?
Mhm.
So we're going to choose outlets that we want to go after. Then we're going to choose the topics we want to talk about. And then we go after that. Then we'll choose similarly industry publications, bloggers who talk about those things, podcasts who cover those things, um, even depending on what the business is, maybe also radio stations. Um, and whatever it is that is the messaging in terms of where we're going for credibility, whatever it is that messaging is, it's in everything that gets published in those 6 weeks. That said, I have had articles and, like, comments that I've submitted to a reporter get published a year later.
Wow.
So yeah. Um, so you could go for 6 weeks and get absolutely nothing, and then a year
Mhm.
later, something will drop.
So you
Um,
probably want to communicate both the company and the founder in case the founder is in a different company like a year later.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Specifically for founders, you just want to be aware that there is a longevity to the news cycle, just as like the news cycle turns really, really quickly.
Mm,
Um, right. So like
right. Those two
we're
things are true at
constantly talking
once.
about new things,
Yeah.
but what might be applicable to you right now might not be applicable in the news cycle for another 6 months.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So um you just kind of have to wait. And that's why I'm like very firm stance. We require a minimum 3 months, but we should really be requiring a minimum of 6 months,
Mhm.
because it can take some time. We like to underpromise and overdeliver,
Mhm.
um, which we often do. Um, but it can definitely take some time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And then,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
one last thing
Yeah.
is I would do a memorable stunt.
Okay.
We have done
Like the
some
Ray-Bans
stunts.
analogy earlier?
Yeah, some really memorable ones that we did. We worked with an Indy 500 team,
Okay.
and we went for the Guinness World Record for the world's fastest fast food delivery.
Huh. That's cool.
Yeah. So stuff like that where, like, it's a stunt and people go, "Oh, that's really cool." Or like for the software company that was for space program, we had a contest
How
with.
involved were you with that fast food delivery? How much are like, because I'm curious when you mention that, like what's, I know there's probably many, many things that would be beyond the scope of this podcast, but like at a high level, do you control the order? And so it's like, and then you have to shut down the road so that the IndyCar can kind of get up to speed. Like, how did that work?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That's
Everything from
amazing.
start to finish.
Yeah. 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 That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please continue. Sorry. That worked because it got my attention.
Yeah. So my husband is the one that runs that side of the business, and he
Oh,
has the
okay.
brain for that. And so he came up with that campaign. He came up with a campaign for the space software, because what we really wanted to do is not only get that software used by companies that were building space equipment, so it was designed for hardware engineers, but we wanted to target hardware engineering students that were coming out of university. And so what we did was partner with SEDS, the Students for the Exploration of Development in Space.
Yeah.
They were given this contest that they were to use this software to rebuild the program management at the International Space Station and build all the different modules
Amazing.
in this software. And so
Yeah.
what we got at the end of it was literally the entire program management of the International Space Station
Wow.
in like a Gantt chart view for the first time ever.
Yeah. Incredible. Sounds like a really dynamic duo, you 2,
Yeah.
working on some fun things. Um,
Yeah, we had he did one where we had a client that was an air purifier company.
okay.
And in New York, there, when we were contracted with them, there were huge, huge wildfires and just
Oh,
smoke everywhere.
in New York.
And so we stood up tents in downtown New York and put air purifiers in the tents and invited people to come in for clean air during wildfires.
I had no idea New York also struggled with, wildfires. I knew that was, like, a California
I think it was
problem.
just like a one-time thing.
Was that, okay, like, a couple years ago?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I think I
yeah,
remember the whole, like, northeastern kind of seaboard seemed to be, experiencing, natural kind of fires and storms and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. Um, so pivoting somewhat to trust and like labeling with like products that we all maybe consume or experience, I wanted to touch on something that you opened my eyes to, which is vitamin D toxicity or supplements that we may be taking. And I guess this implicit trust that it's been tested every which way and it's almost like fully self-driving, like nothing could go wrong. But that doesn't seem to be the case. And can you just maybe share to the extent that you're comfortable, like
yeah.
your experience and kind of maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, just a quick adjustment. So it's not vitamin D, it's vitamin B6.
Okay,
But
thank you.
actually toxicity can happen with vitamin B12, vitamin D. It just kind of depends. In my particular case, it was vitamin B6, and it's included in a lot of products, from obviously vitamins to electrolytes to energy drinks. And in my case, it was marketed and labeled as hydration, which when I moved to Colorado, became very important. People kind of kept mentioning you need to stay hydrated because you live at elevation now. And so I picked up a package that said liquid hydration and I went, great. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know there were vitamins in it. I didn't know there was any risk of cumulative exposure and that cumulative exposure could cause toxicity. Um, and so I wound up with vitamin B6 toxicity. And B6 is crucial to our entire function, central nervous system, autonomic, every function in our body. And when you're overly loaded with synthetic toxic B6, true B6 cannot do its job. And so different parts of your body will start to fail. And all of mine did, basically. Um, and so just, from a marketing perspective, from somebody who is in the industry, um, one, sometimes I feel like shame on me for following for like packaging, marketing packaging,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because I definitely should have been more informed on what was inside the product that I was taking. But I do believe that there should be an obligation to warn consumers about products that have synthetic vitamins, that they are dangerous um, at at cumulative levels. And so this one particular product that I was consuming in particular had 100% of the recommended daily value in a single dose, not including anything else that I was consuming. Vitamin B6 is very prevalent in like chicken and potatoes and bananas and all kinds of stuff. So I was like, for breakfast, I would have an apple, a banana, and an egg. Bananas and
Hmm.
eggs both have B6. And
Hmm.
then I would drink one of these um, packets. And so I was getting like 300% of the recommended daily value of this vitamin per day, every day for about 5 months. And I got really, 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 really sick. And so when it comes to marketing and marketers and packaging, I hope that there becomes an obligation, there be a message on the label that discloses the risks of cumulative exposure and use. Because consumers right now are left to, you pick up a product off a shelf and you self-dose and you think it's safe because in my case, it was sold at Costco.
Hmm.
So you walk into a store and you think everything in
Nothing
the
here is
store
going to
is
be,
safe for
yeah,
me. Yeah.
right. If you were CMO of a supplement company, for example, what would you implement tomorrow?
If the product had vitamin B6 in it, I would take it out. Number
Okay.
one.
So it's not worth messing with it. I
No.
mean, the way you described it, I'm always surprised when I hear stories like this of how complex our body system is and how like one thing can just like it's like mousetrap, it can just like trip up like this whole sequence of events. I didn't know that about vitamin B6. Thank you for sharing. Um, so with particular supplements such as that, you think the benefit, or rather the risk is much greater than the possible benefit. Sounds like it occurs enough in our natural diet. Um, with with other supplements, are there any others that since you become more aware of this, that you think might also be worth kind of informing ourselves about?
Yeah. So sometimes it shows up in magnesium or melatonin supplements, and sometimes it's like very small.
Okay.
So you really have to go looking for it. It's also in most cereals are fortified with vitamin B6. And
Uh,
it's an important vitamin.
mm,
But you should be getting it from natural foods, so you don't need to supplement.
hmm.
It's in multivitamins.
Wow.
It's in a lot of sleep products, so like the AG1 stuff. That's it's everywhere now. That
Yeah.
has synthetic vitamin B6 in it.
Okay.
Um, Electrolyte powders and packets. So that's how it happened to me. I was drinking electrolytes.
Hmm.
Um, thinking that all I was doing was hydrating and not
Right.
understanding that I was messing with
Yeah.
the the levels in my body. Um, so that would be the first thing if I was the CMO and I became aware of so NBC News actually wound up doing two pieces on my story in particular,
Okay.
one written and then one on air segment.
I imagine this has changed your perspective somewhat as you enter a Costco or other stores and are looking at packaging and different um, products being sold. As a marketing leader, what kind of ethical guidelines do you think that brands frequently cross, or what might you change about our consumption culture?
Certainly including ingredients that are possibly dangerous. I think, you know, there are lobbies. Like I didn't know that there was a B6 lobby.
Okay.
And so when you're paid to put this vitamin in it because it's going to make that company more money,
Mhm.
um, but brands sometimes want just to better their bottom line. And so I would say, the focus should always be on the consumer. And if you've got multiple consumers, in the case of the product that I was consuming, reports went up drastically. And so I would want to make sure that my consumers were protected. And so I would remove that ingredient, and warn people.
Hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. Certainly opened my eyes. I will try not to be tempted by it. It's tough when you, especially at Costco, because they have this whole like just area of all these supplements, and you start feeling like FOMO, like, oh, I'm not getting enough of this and that, and so yeah, it's good to keep in mind. Kind of. So, I mean, I don't know if you've done research in the past few months, but are there supplements that you think we do want to maybe consider taking? Like, is there something on the opposite end where we might be routinely under fortified?
Uh, I am not a medical professional. And so every person's needs are different. Um, so in my case, I became because I couldn't consume, I was so toxic, and then you stay toxic for a certain period of time afterwards. I couldn't consume anything that had B6 in it. And so I actually wound up draining my B12,
Mm,
and almost hitting anemia because the majority of meat has a high level of vitamin B6 in it and would cause just immense nerve pain and other symptoms.
wow.
Um, and so, it's important to have enough vitamin B6. It's important to have a really well-rounded diet that includes B12. Fish is a great source of vitamin D and B12 and
Mm,
B6.
okay.
So, making sure that you're getting enough of those things, making sure you're getting enough magnesium, potassium, calcium from
Hmm.
your diet,
Hmm.
from sources that are not fortified.
Hmm.
If you do feel like you need extra hydration, I'm a big fan of unsweetened coconut water. So
Okay.
you don't need an electrolyte powder.
Okay.
Um, you can get the same amount of magnesium, potassium, calcium from coconut water. Um, but I would say, if you feel like you are deficient in something, before you go supplementing, make sure you get a blood test to confirm whether or not you are actually deficient in that thing.
Hmm.
And then consult a medical professional.
Hmm.
And that any vitamin supplementation should be done under the guidance of a medical professional
Hmm.
after having done labs to confirm that you are indeed deficient. Because if you're
Hmm.
not deficient, don't take it.
Hmm. Yeah. Well said. You must be a PR expert or something. So yeah, I mean, seems like you're on the mend. I was also surprised you mentioned just how long the recovery process is, and it seems tough because like the thing you're trying to address, it seems like you almost can't get to. Um, how like if I understood correctly, it's like B6 is almost like the gateway to topping up B12.
Yeah, it's essential for nerve function. Both are essential for nerve function. And so, but if you're cutting out foods that include B6, you're also cutting out foods that include B12. Many
Okay.
of them overlap.
Okay.
And so signs of vitamin B6 and vitamin B12 deficiency can be
Hmm.
very similar,
Hmm.
and toxicity can be very similar.
Hmm.
Um, so for example, after getting a blood test and learning that my vitamin B12 levels were really low,
Hmm.
I did not supplement. Instead, I chose to add more foods to my diet, and sort of rebuild naturally. And I was so low that I did get to the stage where I had to supplement. And what I wound up being recommended was two things. One, like a freeze dried liver capsule. This is very concentrated in B12, but it's still a whole food animal product. So it's
Okay.
not a synthetic product.
So the key differentiator was the synthetic aspect.
Yeah. So I will not consume anything synthetic
Okay.
anymore. Yeah. So the freeze-dried liver, not synthetic, comes from
Yeah.
an animal. It's just
Okay.
happened to be freeze-dried and very concentrated in
Mm,
B6, B12.
mm.
And then the other thing that I was recommended was freeze-dried oyster, also very concentrated in B12. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
And how's your day like now? Are you like 80%, 90% back to normal or completely recovered, would you say, after 5 months or so?
Uh, so actually, today is a year to the day that I was hospitalized
Oh,
for the first time,
okay.
and I would say I'm about 80%
Wow.
there. Healing
Yeah.
is not linear.
No.
Um, and for the first 6 months, I was still toxic because B6 has a half life of 30 days.
Okay.
So half of the amount of the toxin leaves your body every 30 days. So I was still toxic for 6 months, even after stopping it.
Mm,
And only then, after that time passed, could I start to heal without
mm,
interference from being toxic.
mm.
So I've only really been, although I was declared, I had been toxic since December of last year. I was declared officially toxic via blood test in May. I stopped May 31st of 2025. So I stopped, let's say, consuming them on June 1st, June 2nd. I was still toxic until November. And only then, since November, have I started to heal.
Sounds like after a few billion years, we've adapted best to our natural environment, and the prevention, as they say, is worth a pound of cure. So just eating healthy, eating a balanced diet, like you said, living healthy, and maybe being somewhat cautious about supplementing certainly artificial ingredients to our diet is worth considering. Well, thank you for sharing that. Definitely opened my eyes, and I'll remember B6, not D. I
Yeah.
think I took my
Although
vitamin D
D,
this morning and
you
had
can
a
also
crossover.
get D toxicity. And what's interesting about vitamin D is that it's fat soluble, so it stays in your fat.
Okay.
Um, and so toxicity in that case is a totally different beast.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Where
because
does vitamin B6
B6,
reside?
it gets into your nerves, your muscles, your fibers,
Okay,
tissues, neurons, receptors, everything.
all the good stuff. So sorry, I cut you off. So what's different about being fat soluble or stored in the fat?
It's essentially stored in fat, which means it does take a long time. So it can there's definitely another cumulative exposure risk,
Okay.
but it's cumulative buildup in your fat cells and your
Mm,
fat storage. So
mm,
that can also look different for different people.
yeah. Well, heavy stuff. Glad you're with us and able to share
Thank you.
your wisdom and interesting experience career wise. I'm
Thank you.
curious your next a doctor visit if that's going to open up to a whole new brand opportunity for you, given how your dentist experience went. Um, so as we wrap up, is there anything we didn't touch on regarding like PR, messaging, brand culture awareness, something like that that you feel you want to leave us with?
Just quickly that like LinkedIn is really blowing up for a lot of founders,
Uh-huh.
and having a presence on there and taking a stance and being yourself and being funny and commenting, and newsletters are on the rise. I'm actually doing a session tomorrow with my team on LinkedIn best practices and what companies and founders can do. It'll have passed by the time this airs, but you can always watch the recording.
Okay.
Um, I would be very active on LinkedIn. I'm very active, um, and I would recommend that to everyone.
Great. And where can people find you? LinkedIn, I imagine. And is there anywhere else you want to point people to?
Yeah, so on my LinkedIn, I'm just Blair Huddy, and then on all the other socials, I am real Blair Huddy, which is a marketing tactic. So if you add like the word real to your
Hmm.
name,
Uh-huh.
REAL,
Yeah.
it gets people interested on like, oh, you must be somebody worth following if you need to make sure that you're
It's
the
like a
real
blue
one.
check mark.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Blair, for speaking with us today. Really interesting, insights.
Thank you so much for having me.